This is the Darshan Talks podcast. Regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. I am Major Hoffman. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com. Hey guys, my name is Major. I'm here with Darshan, and this is Darshan Talks. Today, or in this episode, we're going to discuss the gene editing, CRISPR, and Chinese, and how that applies to Chinese babies. Darshan, how does that work?
That sounds all kinds of wrong with the word CRISPR in there, but it's a really interesting concept. So here's the first question. Major, have you heard much about CRISPR? Should we talk about that first?
I want to say that I have only because it's something about gene, like when you say gene editing, it's kind of like a taboo topic, because I want to say that's kind of what happened with like Nazi Germany and how they tried to edit genes or like breed certain people and you know it just, that's kind of a topic that I really don't care to discuss in this episode, but because of that, I'm kind of hands off on it, on the topic, and I'm just curious because the last episode we talked about bioethics, and that you know is essentially the foundation for informed consent, and this is very linear from that. Like this is a very pretty sincere connection to it. So that's all I've heard about it.
So let's get a couple of, it's interesting you put it that way, so maybe we should clarify some things. So CRISPR is gene editing.
Okay.
It's where RNA segments and enzymes are used to identify and modify DNA sequences. Mm-hmm. And it could be used, it's primarily been used in organisms, like smaller organisms for the most part, because they're trying to figure out what it does. The reason it was in the news recently was because a Chinese scientist went out and used CRISPR on babies. And his argument was that he was helping the babies. The question is, from a bioethics standpoint, is that true? I do also want to take this moment to clarify. You talked a few seconds ago about Nazi Germany, and you talked about gene editing. Mm-hmm. Nazi Germany was more about what's called eugenics.
Eugenics, that's what it was.
Creating the perfect human, if you will. And as Hitler saw it, that person was blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and you know all the usual stuff that people.
They had their own definition of that in the direction, and how. I guess that's kind of where I lumped this together with that, and I know that's not exactly right for obvious reasons. This is gene editing. It's not, you know, you're not doing what they did. How does this work, and why is that a bad thing to help the babies from that angle, from that direction?
Is it bad is the first question, right? So that's
right.
So let's talk about that first, and then come back to gene editing. Sorry, come back to CRISPR.
Right.
The first question is, how is that different from what Hitler was doing? Number one, what Hitler was doing was he was trying to create a perfect kind of human being. So that would be eugenics. The question here is this doctor trying to create a perfect human being, and or is he trying to just improve disease? Because if it's improving disease, is it necessarily bad? Because isn't that what we all want? Isn't that exactly what an antibiotic does? To improve disease. We spend a lot of money, and we spend trillions of dollars in the US helping patients. If you can actually avoid the disease itself, why would that be a bad thing? But there have been challenges to that concept. A really interesting challenge to that is there were some discussions a few years ago of what if we could use something like CRISPR to get rid of blindness or to get rid of deafness. Would that be a good thing or a bad thing? What do you think, Major?
Well, I mean,
or get rid of Down syndrome.
I mean, you know, it depends on who you ask about that. I guess if you have Downs, then I think, you know, that is another ethical question. You're throwing me under the bus here, man. No, like, so if we were to remove some negative aspects, cancer, if that goes away, yeah, that's obvious. That's a positive. But
why is cancer a positive, but Downs maybe not?
Well, okay. eliminating the opportunity for that to happen. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying not to say that Downs is bad, and only because
And that's the point.
Right. That's the point. If you have Downs, that's an unfortunate scenario. That's an unfortunate situation. You may be in a position where you're making the most out of what you have. Just playing the cards you're dealt.
But on the other hand, there's actually an entire community that says Downs isn't a horrible thing.
Right.
It's just how society sees it.
Right.
It's the same way with the hearing people who don't have hearing and the people who can't see. They say we have a community. You see us as disabled. We see ourselves as differently.
Is it a disability? Right. That's
right.
Right. But what about something like the flu? So you guys
eliminating that is eliminating our community as if we are something to be pitied, something to not be valued. And
right.
That's the question you start getting into. And that's exactly what this physician or the scientist was really getting into. They were saying, what if we could actually eliminate certain types of diseases?
Well, going back to what we're talking about, that is kind of a backdoor to eugenics, isn't it? That's what they were trying to do with eugenics, is to eliminate all what they were considering the negative aspects, and that's
correct.
So that
it's a slippery slope, though.
Okay.
That's the exact point.
Right. But
so maybe it starts with cancer, and not many people are going to argue that we want a community of people with cancer, not because it doesn't help them, but because people would rather not have cancer.
But then that primes a pump, and people start asking, well, what else can we eliminate?
Correct, and that's the big question. So now let's sort of apply the basics that we learned in the last podcast. The 4 principles of bioethics, or the 3 principles of bioethics, are beneficence, non-malfeasance, autonomy, and justice. Beneficence is making sure that it's being done in the interest so that it helps the person who's actually participating. Non-malfeasance is you aren't trying to hurt that person. Autonomy speaks to that person's ability to participate or not participate. And justice goes to the ability of that person to benefit as well. There's some people will say there's crossover with beneficence, and that's not necessarily true. Justice may be something like, will only the rich people benefit from this from this study? Will we test on only certain types of individuals? So that would be the core pieces. In this specific instance, in the case of the Chinese physician or Chinese scientist, there's no argument that he didn't go out try to address an unmet medical need. Obviously, like we mentioned before, the editing itself is still not figured out. People are still trying to figure out what CRISPR can and cannot do.
Now, just to clarify, this doctor, he's aware of these ethics. This is not something where he just one day decides, becoming a doctor. Now that he's a doctor, he has to understand that the bioethics of the research he's doing, right? It's not.
Oh, it gets interesting because he actually spoke to several people. Mm-hmm. Some people said, do not go ahead. And he spoke to, I think, 1 or 2 people who said, go ahead. Mm-hmm. But the vast majority said, don't.
Right. Okay.
But does he have to listen to the vast majority? And do they get to make that decision anyways? It's not their body. And no one really understands. It's not clear what these new mutations will do. Mm-hmm. There were problems that were spoken about with informed consent. And like we just discussed, people said, no, don't do it. So he tried to hide it and worked under a cloak of secrecy. And even though some people knew about it, they weren't really able to stop him. And as we said, for the most part, he had himself said that he wouldn't want to go down this path. So is that really ethical when other people tell you not to do something, you say you probably won't do something, you ask people for advice and they tell you not to do something, and is that even relevant though?
Well, then do you start looking at how was he funded? Was he under an assumption that he was doing something for the greater good? Is there some force that was making him do this? Like, what is there anything else to ask to that? So
the Chinese government has come out and said that we're going to punish him. So the question then becomes, for example, there was a situation several years ago where the head of the Chinese FDA was caught taking bribes and he was executed for it. Now the question becomes, if that's the type of punishment we're looking at, is this person going to come out and say what happened? Is he looking at capital punishment as a potential punishment? And from a bioethical standpoint, has he helped the children in question? And let's analyze each one. So from a beneficence standpoint, Major, do you think the people benefited from having CRISPR done to them? The children, do you think they would have benefited?
I guess it depends on how it was done. Now, because it's possible for there to be a mistake, right?
It is possible for there to be a mistake.
But assuming that there are no mistakes,
isn't that science, though?
That's science, right? But assuming that there are no mistakes, I would say it passes the first test. Now we're talking about 4 tests, right? The beneficence.
We are talking about 4 tests.
Non-malfeasance.
We are talking about 4 tests. No, we're not talking about non-malfeasance. We're only talking about beneficence.
Right. I'm just going through the list. So the first test is beneficence. Second is non-malfeasance. The third is autonomy, and fourth is justice. The first one, beneficence, doing good for the person. Is that what that is? Basically,
yeah, doing good for the person.
So in this instance, we're talking about the scientist doing CRISPR, or applying
using CRISPR.
Using CRISPR.
Yep.
On a baby who.
And when he hasn't quite figured out how CRISPR works.
Oh.
Because no one really has. They're still trying to figure it out right now.
Well, that's science, isn't it? Like, somebody has to be the first one to do something in order for that step to be taken.
Sure. Absolutely.
And so is the question...
But now, should they have the right to say yes? Is there benefit if you don't know there's benefit?
Well, then
I would argue that he may not meet beneficence. I see your point, but I would argue that he may not meet beneficence because the editing itself, like I mentioned earlier, wasn't actually done properly. There was no clear unmet medical need.
Well, I'm assuming you're asking if there's nothing wrong with his process, like if he's doing this. And everything is as it should be. Does it pass the first test of beneficence?
Sure.
That's where my yes comes from.
Fair enough. But I think at this point we don't know yet. We don't think that most scientists agree that CRISPR is still being worked on. They haven't fully figured it out yet.
Well, wouldn't you have to have some sort of authority, or there have to be some sort of authority that says, yes, this is a valid process, and here is the correct way to do this?
Correct. So that would typically be what your IRB does. Okay. That would typically be what the FDA may get involved in. Depending on the type of study, they may even look at things like, if you were in the U.S., for example, AHARP and NIH and the like may get involved as well.
But this isn't the U.S., right? This is
not the U.S. This is China.
Right.
Correct. So beneficence, okay, it's up in the air.
Right.
Let's target autonomy. Do you think that the child or the parents may have had autonomy to say yes or no?
What about non-malfeasance? Like, or did we loop that in with the beneficence?
We're going to loop that into beneficence for the most part for these conversations, but yeah.
I don't think they did. I don't think they do have an ability to make the decision because this isn't a process that is established or understood to be a process. There's no way for a parent, obviously, or a baby to make the decision, to make an educated decision that this is the way to go. I mean, I could see maybe if the parent, maybe if the child had an issue or was born with a condition the parent saw as an issue, they may be more inclined to participate. But that's as far as I can take that.
Yeah, I think you're generally right. I would say that, especially in countries like China, and I can speak personally to my own experiences in India, clinicians, specifically physicians, are revered as significant people of authority. So questioning them is often inappropriate. So to come out and say, if the doctor says this is what I want you to do, it's not should I jump, it's how high. So in the same way,
Because you don't want to be the reason it fails. You want to do everything in your power to, to fall in line with the process.
Correct. And that's, so I would argue, even from an autonomy standpoint, we probably wouldn't meet the bioethical tests, if you will. Mm-hmm. And then there's the last one of justice.
Right.
Will this group benefit from it in the same way as anyone else?
I think your answer for that is going to be if you thought there was anything wrong to begin with. Right?
Tell me more. What do you mean?
So if you, for example, think that if you consider an issue or a condition to be bad, this leads back into what we were talking about earlier. If you see being blind as bad, or if you see having 3 arms is bad, and a baby is born with 3 arms, and then does this therapy or does this in an effort to change that, to maybe reduce the arms, the number of arms, is that a benefit? Well, it depends. Do you see 3 arms as a positive? And if you do, then no, they didn't benefit because that reduced their quality of life. I think if you maybe consider it from a quality of life standpoint, that
it could be. I would argue that would fall more under beneficence than under justice. But
improving.
Well, justice is equality of opportunity in many cases, equality of abilities and stuff like that. So equality to benefit from this situation.
Quality of life, not equality.
No, I know. I'm saying it's justice is about equality.
Right. Okay.
And the question then becomes, who were these children? Who were the parents? I don't know if we have enough details on that. Right. So we can't tell. But it's unlikely that these were rich parents in China who'd say, "Yep, go ahead, test on my baby."
Right.
It's more likely that it was that they were not. Even more likely is maybe he or she was told that there's something wrong with the baby, so we're going to do something more to them. In which case, did they really have autonomy, or did the scientific community take that ability away from these parents? So I would say at all of these levels, at all 4 core principles, those conditions weren't met, and I think that's a problem. What do you think, Major?
I think we should talk about cheeseburgers or something that does not include words like maleficence.
Malfeasance.
Malfeasance. Okay. Sure.
Sure. There you go.
Oh man, no, this is a very interesting topic, and I know this episode is running a bit longer than expected, but this is a very, very important subject and something you should actually consider if you haven't yet. And I went into this. This was a cold read for me in jumping into this topic, because I really wanted my genuine reaction to be recorded with Darshan explaining bioethics and how gene editing kind of comes into play with that. And it's man, talk about a roller coaster.
Glad you had a good time.
Well, I don't know an informed time. Maybe it is more accurate way, but we haven't. This isn't the end of the topic either, right? Because we're going to talk about how 23andMe comes into play in the next episode. So stick around.
Stay tuned.
Thank you for listening to the Darshan Talks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. I am Major Hoffman. If you have any questions for Darshan, reach out via Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.